Hello again, Bleeding Critic. This is Karen Runge, the horror writer, and this is my horror therapy, where you invited us to talk about a true paranormal, supernatural, or otherwise weird experience that we've actually had. This is very easy for me because the house that I grew up in, for the most part, was actually haunted. Lots of people like to question that if I bring it up, if I mention it, talk about imagination, hysteria, all this stuff, and honestly, it gets a bit annoying because this wasn't just me. This is something that my entire family and I experienced in that house over a number of years, and it was very real, and it was not nice. This house. Okay, so we moved there when I was 9 years old. I was nine, my brother was 11, 12, something like that. And beautiful big house, fairly new in the Natal Midlands, the Drakensberg region. A section of South Africa that actually gets pretty cold. It's in the valley, it's got mountains, it snows in the mountains. Sometimes actually it snows enough to reach the towns. It's not this idea of what people think South Africa is. This is important for later. I'll tell you why when we get there. The house, my stepfather had owned it for a number of years actually before we moved there, and he'd been renting it, leasing it. None of the tenants there stayed very long, which is quite telling. The other interesting fact is that the people he bought it from, I believe, were actually the original designers. That was their dream home, and they designed it and built it themselves. And they only stayed there for about 2 years or so. When we did move there, the house had been standing empty for some time. I'm not sure how long. This was South Africa in the 1990s. There were no security bars on the windows, nothing like that. So it's interesting that an empty house would not be taken over by homeless people because they could very easily have gotten in there. Instead, the only signs he saw were of people having, homeless people having used the shelter from the verandas. And that was it. They never even tried to get into the house, which doesn't make a lot of sense, really. When we were in the house in the beginning, it wasn't that hectic. Haunted house situations, at least ours, it wasn't like you see in movies where there's lots of crash bang, lights flickering, footsteps, voices from day one. These things do happen, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot slower, a lot more spaced out. And when you're living there, you feel like you're under a sort of fog or haze. There's like a kind of veil that goes over your mind. I don't know how else to explain it, really. The one thing that we all felt right from the beginning was a constant sense that you are not alone. It doesn't matter which room you're in or what you're doing. You are never alone. There's something behind you. There's something with you. There's something in the corner of the room, and not nice. Like a very negative, menacing presence. You know, like if someone's glaring at you, you can feel when someone's glaring at you. It was like that all the time. I know that sounds quite tame, but try living it. Because we're talking all the time. We're talking all the time. So much for taking a nap or. If you get lost in a book, that's not going to last very long because you can feel this thing staring at you. That was constant. That was all the time. They talk about rooms in haunted houses that are hot or cold, I suppose. And there were two rooms in particular in this house that were pretty intolerable. The first was my brother's original bedroom. And it didn't happen often, but a fair few times that I would wake up and my brother would be sleeping on the carpet next to my bed, and he would say he couldn't stand being in there. He couldn't be in that room. There was someone standing at the foot of his bed. There was someone standing right next to him. Once he felt like he described it as like a cold hand go back through his hair. He was terrified. He didn't like to be in that room at all. And he spoke to my mother about this. We both told our mother often, this is happening, we feel this, we're seeing this, etc. And she would always say to us, you kids are young, you're full of imagination, there's nothing wrong, the house is fine, the room is fine, everything's fine, like, shut up, basically. But at one point, my stepfather did wall off one of the smaller verandas and turned that into a bedroom, which my brother then moved into, and he was much happier after that. His original bedroom then became the guest bedroom. Sorry for the guests, I think. But we were much happier with that setup. And that room became the computer room. This was back in the day when you'd get your family PC, and it was this big deal. And so that was the computer room. My brother and I, in our early teens, quickly became gamers. We were really into games, Quake, Doom, Heretic, all these things. And even then, it was almost like an unspoken thing that when we were playing, we'd want the other one with us, because it was just impossible to be alone in that room. You had the desk facing a wall and the door behind you, and you always felt like there was someone behind you, or someone coming in, or something, just this really dark presence that loved to be in there and really didn't want you to be in there. Not nice. The second room was a little bit more serious, actually, was the living room. I mentioned earlier that in this part of South Africa it gets particularly cold. This is important because South African houses are generally designed to let the warmth out. They don't keep the heat in. So, and there's no radiators on the walls. So in winters you can get really cold. We'd be walking around in sheepskin slippers, blankets wrapped around us, and this is what South African winters are like. And this living room had a fireplace, a beautiful big fireplace. It was also a gorgeous room with really big windows letting in all the light. You would think that we would live in there in winter. But no, nobody wanted to be in there. Nobody wanted to be in there. We'd sometimes go in there in a pack, my mother, my stepfather, my brother, myself, my stepbrothers too, if they were there. And then we'd be okay. I was an avid reader, and it happened to me on several occasions that we'd go in there as a family, and I'd sit by the fire and start reading, and get lost in a book, and not realize that one by one people had been leaving the room. And the only thing that would wake me up to that was, again, that feeling like something is staring at me, like something wants to kill me, basically, standing in the room with me. That room was awful. You never felt safe. You felt really like your life was in danger in that room. Walking past it at night, no joke. Yeah, not nice. Just that it just reeked. It just reeked. It was awful. Other than that, it was mostly quite quiet until we reached our teens. I've heard a few theories that energies, spiritual energies, stuff like that, like to use the excess energy of kids going through puberty. And I think that's probably true from my experience, because when my brother and I were both in our teens, that was when it really kicked off. That was when we were hearing footsteps, we were hearing voices. Not every day, not every night, but often enough. And trust me, once in a life is enough. And you can imagine we were going home to this day in, day out. My brother was once in the shower, and he bailed out of there and came to me. He said that when he was standing there in the shower, he saw this shadow move up the wall. Like he described it as like a head with shoulders and just that, and like solid black moving up the wall, and it disappeared in the crease between the wall and the ceiling, like that. That was one of the more extreme things. What was the other thing? A lot happened to him, actually. His bedroom window, which was worked on a hinge, shut in front of him once. Things like this. My brother and I did go to our mother, and we'd say to her, listen, we're hearing this, we're seeing this, we're feeling this, this isn't normal, and this house isn't normal, and maybe we should move. And she would just say to us, you kids are young and full of imagination, etc., etc., and she wouldn't entertain the idea at all. I did actually see it once. It did manifest in front of me once. And actually, what I saw was quite similar to what my brother saw, but with light. I saw like the side of a head and a shoulder, and kind of like light was behind it, coming into my room. Freaked me out completely. It's still something when I remember it. It feels extremely surreal, and yet I know it happened. I know it happened. There's a lot of stories from this house. It would take forever to go through all of them. We stayed in that house for about 10 years, I think. I left home when I was 18, and pretty quickly after that I moved overseas to London, and I stayed there for 3 years. And I was in London when my mother phoned me one day to say that she and my stepfather had finally sold the house and they were moving. And I said to her on the phone, I know you never believed us, but fantastic. I am so happy that you're moving, because whatever you thought or whatever you felt, there was something very wrong with that house, and I'm glad that it's over now. And that was when she said to me, now I can tell you that I always knew. Which absolutely blew my mind. Years and years and years of her denying anything happening in that house. She said that she denied it because she didn't want to make it worse for me and my brother. She didn't want to feed our fear. So she kept on trying to downplay it and say that there was nothing wrong, which I can understand. That. When I went back home after living in London or on holiday or something, I don't remember exactly. That first time when I went to see my mother after that, it was amazing. I sat in her beautiful new unhaunted kitchen in her beautiful new unhaunted house, and then she told me a few things that I never knew about and never would have guessed that were terrifying in a different level to what my brother and I had experienced. I remember when I was a kid, in her bedroom there were 2 sash windows, like beautiful big sash windows, and I remember going into her room one day and seeing that one had been hectically reinforced, like nails and planks and all this stuff, like reinforced to the nth, and asking her what was wrong with it, and she said, no, it keeps sliding open and we don't know how to stop it, so we're just reinforcing it as much as we can. And I thought, okay, I didn't think anything of it. In this conversation years later, she said that the real reason why that it happened was because in her room, every morning at 3 a.m., on that particular window, not the other one, just the one, there would be this banging, this loud banging on the window, like hands banging to wake her and my stepfather up. Drove them crazy. Imagine that, waking up at 3 o'clock every morning like someone's about to break in. That's what they lived through. Anyway, it was wonderful to finally speak with her and have it out in the open and have it set. I remember my ex coming to South Africa with me once, and we were going through photo albums and stuff, as you do, and I said to him, that's the house, and he'd always been this massive skeptic, and he looked at me like, really? I'm gonna call myself out on this? Like I'd been lying or playing a game or something. And he looked at my mother and he said, so is it true? And she said, yes, absolutely it is, which was nice for me. And then we told him a few stories and had to reassure him that this house is safe. This house we're in now is not that house, so it's okay. So that's the story. There's lots more, of course, but it would take a long time. These are just the basic points of what it was like for us in that house. I still to this day catch myself, without thinking, reciting this little mantra that I made up as a kid, that I used to say to try and feel like I was alone against this feeling of being watched, like this little prayer I had devised to say, like, get out, leave me alone. So now I write horror, and I sometimes have people say, oh, you write horror, interesting, so you write about ghosts and stuff, and I say no, I don't write about the supernatural very often, or if I do, it's quite subtle, because I'm not interested in ghost stories. I've lived one. I know what that feels like. I've looked that in the eye, and I've absolutely no desire to revisit it in fiction, in my fiction. It does leave a sense with you that the world is stranger than what you know. The one good thing from that is that you can't not be open-minded after you've experienced that kind of thing that you can't explain, and yet is so relentless. Yeah, there we go. Horror therapy. I'm not sure I feel better, but thank you anyway. Catch you next time.